I got divorced and moved to another country to start fresh. Soon after, my ex-husband married the woman he'd been seeing. But during their wedding, a guest revealed something that shook her so hard she couldn't finish her vows. Minutes later, she called me, voice shaking, and what she asked me still makes no sense. I'd moved to Barcelona to forget Silas Montgomery existed. 6 months of no contact. 6 months of building a new life in a city where no one knew I'd spent 9 years becoming invisible in a marriage to a man who'd replaced me so smoothly I hadn't noticed until it was already done. 6 months of finally learning to take up space again. Then on a Saturday afternoon in October, while I was sitting at a cafe in Gracia working on a design project, his name appeared on my phone. My first instinct was to ignore it. Block the number. Protect the peace I'd fought so hard to build. But something stopped me. Maybe curiosity, maybe the small part of me that still wanted to know if he regretted what he'd done. I answered. Thea. His voice was wrecked, barely recognizable. I need to ask you something. Not hello. Not how are you. Not I'm sorry for everything. Just straight to whatever crisis had made him break 6 months of silence. Did you know Victoria was married? Did you know and you didn't tell me? I pulled the phone away from my ear, stared at it like it had started speaking another language. What are you talking about? My wedding was today. To Victoria. Except it turns out she's already married. To Robert. My brother Robert. And then he told me everything. But to understand why that phone call felt like the universe finally balancing its books, you need to know how I got here. How a confident art school graduate with paint-stained hands and big dreams became a woman who packed her entire life into 4 suitcases and fled to another continent just to remember who she used to be. I met Silas Montgomery when I was 24, working at a small graphic design studio in Seattle's Capitol Hill neighborhood. I was fresh out of art school, still believing that talent and passion were enough to build a career, still naive enough to think love meant finding someone who celebrated who you were instead of redesigning you into who they needed. He walked into Victrola Coffee one rainy Tuesday afternoon while I was sketching in my favorite corner booth. I was working on a logo design for a local band, surrounded by colored pencils and coffee cups, completely absorbed in trying to capture the right feeling of Northwest grunge meets modern minimalism. You're really talented, he said, appearing beside my table with the confidence of someone accustomed to his presence being welcomed. He wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent, carried a leather briefcase that screamed corporate attorney, and had the kind of smile that made you feel like you were the only person in the room worth noticing. I should have heard the condescension in that sentence. The subtle surprise that someone like me, in my paint-splattered jeans and oversized cardigan, could create something worth noticing. But I was 24 and flattered that this polished, successful man saw me at all. We dated for 2 years. Looking back, I can see the pattern was there from the beginning, but I was too young and too in love to recognize it. Silas worked as an associate at Patterson and Hale, one of those corporate law firms where everyone spoke in acronyms I didn't understand and treated 100-hour work weeks as badges of honor. He introduced me to a world of charity galas and firm cocktail parties and restaurants where the menu had no prices and everyone knew which fork to use for which course. I thought he was showing me a bigger life. I didn't realize he was showing me how small mine was in comparison. The proposal came at one of those charity galas, the Emerald City Children's Foundation fundraiser, held at the Four Seasons with 500 guests in designer formal wear. Silas got down on one knee in front of all his colleagues, presenting a ring that must have cost 3 months of my salary, and everyone applauded like they were witnessing something beautiful instead of my last chance to say no to a future I wasn't sure I wanted. But I said yes. Because I was 26 and he was 28 and everyone said we were perfect together, even though I could see his colleagues' polite smiles that asked what he was doing with the artsy girl in the off-the-rack dress. The first 3 years of marriage were good. Or at least I thought they were. Silas worked long hours, but he came home to me. We had Sunday brunches at neighborhood cafes and movie nights where we'd argue about whether the film was art or entertainment. I kept my design job, kept my studio apartment's lease for the first year even after moving into his Capitol Hill townhouse, kept telling myself I wasn't losing myself just because I was building a life with someone else. But somewhere around year 4 things started shifting. Small changes at first, so gradual I couldn't pinpoint when they began. Silas started mentioning that my clothes were a bit casual for firm dinners. That maybe I should consider elevating my professional image, if I wanted to be taken seriously. That my bright colors and vintage finds were charming, but not quite appropriate for the circles we're moving in now. I started buying clothes in blacks and grays and navy blues. Professional colors, Silas called them. I told myself I was maturing, growing up, becoming the kind of woman who could stand beside a successful attorney without embarrassing him. My art collective meetings, a group of local designers and illustrators who'd been meeting monthly for critiques and support since before I'd met Silas, became a problem around year 5. After I'd missed 3 meetings in a row because of firm events Silas needed me to attend, I tried to explain to him how important that community was to my creative development. He'd used his reasonable attorney voice, the one that made disagreeing feel childish. I'm not saying you can't go, Thea. I'm just pointing out that spending every third Tuesday with amateur artists isn't really advancing your career. You're a professional designer now. Shouldn't you be networking with people who can actually help you grow? I stopped going to the meetings. Told myself he was right. I needed to be more strategic, more focused, more serious about building a career instead of just playing at being an artist. My best friend Jenna lasted until year 6. She'd been my roommate in art school, the kind of friend who knew me well enough to call out my nonsense and love me anyway. But after she joined us for dinner one night and dominated the conversation with her usual chaotic energy, talking too loud, laughing too much, telling rambling stories about her latest dating disasters, Silas spent the entire drive home explaining how exhausting she was. I like Jenna, he said in that careful tone that meant he absolutely didn't. But her constant drama is emotionally draining. You're not 23 anymore. Maybe you need some space from friendships that aren't adding value to your life. I started seeing Jenna less. Responding to her texts with increasing delays. Making excuses about being too busy or too tired or needing to attend some firm function. She noticed. Of course she noticed, but I convinced myself Silas was right. That I was maturing. That real adult friendships weren't supposed to be so messy and demanding. My family gatherings in Portland became optional somewhere around year 7. My parents would invite us for birthdays, holidays, regular Sunday dinners, and Silas always had a reason we couldn't go. An important client meeting he needed to prepare for. A partner's retreat he couldn't miss. A Sunday morning where he desperately needed quiet time to decompress from the week. I started going alone, which meant listening to my mother ask carefully neutral questions about why my husband never came. Watching my sister Maya's eyes fill with concern she didn't voice because she didn't want to make me defensive. Seeing my nephew and niece grow up in family photos where Silas was conspicuously absent. Eventually I stopped going as often. It was easier than explaining. Easier than seeing my own diminishment reflected in their worried faces. By year 8 I'd stopped painting entirely. Not deliberately, I didn't wake up one day and decide to quit. But my watercolors dried up from disuse. My sketchbooks gathered dust. My easel was folded and stored in the basement because Silas needed the spare room for a home office and the easel cluttered the living room. I'd wake up some mornings in our Capitol Hill townhouse, look at my closet full of gray and black clothes, my calendar empty of friend dates and family visits, my art supplies packed away in boxes I never opened, and wonder when I'd stopped being a person and started being just Silas's wife. Then Victoria Ashford entered our lives during year 6, and I didn't recognize her for what she was. The woman who'd been watching me disappear and taking notes on how to replace me. She was introduced at a firm cocktail party as the new CFO of Meridian Development, one of Patterson and Hale's major clients. Everything about her screamed success. Designer suit, perfect hair, the kind of confidence that comes from knowing exactly where you belong in the world. She talked fluently about quarterly projections and market positioning, laughed at inside jokes about SEC regulations, moved through the room like she owned it. Silas mentioned her casually at first. Met the new Meridian CFO today. Victoria Ashford. Sharp woman, really understands corporate strategy. Then her name started appearing more frequently in his conversations. Victoria had recommended a restaurant. Victoria had tickets to a fundraiser. Victoria thought I'd enjoy this gallery opening. I didn't realize she was studying me. Learning everything about me so she could become my opposite. My replacement. She was always friendly when we interacted at firm events. Complimentary, even asking about my design work with apparent interest. Admiring my contributions to conversations even when I felt out of my depth discussing corporate law and business strategy. You have such a creative eye, she told me once at a partner's dinner, touching my arm with what seemed like genuine warmth. Silas is lucky to have someone who brings that artistic perspective to his life. Though have you ever thought about getting an MBA? You could really maximize your potential with some business training to complement your creative skills. I'd smiled and thanked her, not recognizing the subtle message. You're creative, which is cute but not quite enough. The weekend work sessions started around year 7. Emergency contract reviews that required Silas at the office on Saturday mornings. Strategy meetings that ran late into Thursday nights. Client dinners that turned into drinks that turned into Silas texting me at 11 p.m. saying he'd just grab an Uber home, don't wait up. Victoria's name was always attached to these events. Victoria needs help reviewing the merger documents. Victoria invited some clients for drinks, important for the firm. Victoria and I are brainstorming strategy for the Meridian presentation. I didn't question it because I trusted him. Because after 8 years of marriage, you don't suddenly start suspecting your husband of cheating. Because Silas had never given me reason to doubt him before, and I couldn't imagine him being the kind of man who'd lie to my face while building a relationship with someone else. But that's exactly what he was doing. The divorce came as a shock, even though looking back I should have seen it coming. Silas sat me down one evening in February, 9 years into our marriage, and explained with the calm rationality of a man presenting a case to a jury that our marriage wasn't working. We want different things, he said. We've grown in different directions. You need someone who understands your artistic temperament. I need a partner who gets the demands of my career. He made it sound so reasonable. So mutual. So much like a natural conclusion to something that had simply run its course. I signed the papers 3 weeks later, too numb to fight, too convinced by his logic that we'd simply grown apart. I moved out of the townhouse into a temporary sublet, divided our belongings with the efficiency of people who'd stopped loving each other so gradually they couldn't remember when it had happened. Then 3 weeks after I'd moved out, Jenna sent me a screenshot that shattered the entire narrative Silas had constructed. It was from the Seattle Times Society page, a photo from the Emerald City Gala, one of those charity events where Seattle's elite paid $1,000 a plate to feel philanthropic. Silas stood next to Victoria, both holding champagne flutes, his hand resting on her lower back in a gesture of easy intimacy. They were smiling at each other like they shared secrets, like they'd been together for months. Maybe years. The caption read, "Power couple Silas Montgomery and Victoria Ashford steal the show at this year's Emerald City Gala." Power couple. Not colleagues. Not friends. Power couple. I'd stared at that photo for hours, zooming in on details, trying to determine when the picture had been taken. The gala had been 2 weeks after our divorce was finalized. Which meant they'd waited exactly 2 weeks before going public. Which meant everyone at that event, all of Silas's colleagues, all of Victoria's business contacts, probably half of Seattle's legal and business community, knew they were together. Which meant I'd been the last to know my marriage was over. Jenna's text had been simple. "I'm sorry, T. I thought you should know what everyone's been saying." Everyone had been saying. Past tense. They'd already known. While I'd been shrinking myself, trying desperately to be the wife Silas needed, everyone else had been watching him build a new relationship right in front of me. That's when I'd booked the flight to Barcelona. 4 days later, I'd boarded a plane with 4 suitcases containing everything I owned that still felt like mine. I'd taken a permanent remote position with an international marketing firm, rented a tiny apartment in Gracia, and started the work of figuring out who Thea was when she wasn't performing the role of Silas Montgomery's wife. 6 months. That's how long it had been since I'd left Seattle. Since I'd heard Silas's voice or thought about Victoria or allowed myself to wonder whether the divorce had been my fault or his or some combination of both that I'd never fully understand. 6 months of learning to take up space again. Of wearing bright colors because I liked them. Of making friends who were loud and messy and exactly the kind of people Silas would have found exhausting. Of painting again for myself without worrying whether it was professional enough or serious enough or advancing any kind of career. And now his voice was in my ear, wrecked and desperate, telling me that Victoria, the woman who'd replaced me, the woman who'd perfected everything I'd failed at, was married. Still married. To his brother. And he wanted to know if I'd known. If I'd kept it secret. If I'd let him walk into a wedding that was built on a lie even bigger than the one that had ended our marriage. I looked out at Barcelona, at the cafe tables, the tourists with their cameras, the locals moving through their Saturday with the ease of people who belonged, and I realized the universe had just handed me the strangest gift. Revenge I hadn't asked for. Justice I hadn't sought. Vindication delivered 6,000 miles away, 6 months too late to matter, but perfectly timed to prove that I'd never been the problem at all. Silas, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. I've been in Barcelona for 6 months. I don't know anything about Victoria except that you left me for her. Now tell me exactly what happened. Silas's voice was shaking as he started talking, words tumbling over each other in a way that was completely unlike his usual controlled attorney speech. The wedding was today. This afternoon at the Woodmark Hotel in Kirkland. Everything was perfect, Victoria in this champagne dress, all our colleagues there, both our families. The ceremony went fine. We said our vows, got pronounced husband and wife, moved to the reception. Dinner, toasts, everything going exactly as planned. I stayed silent, holding my phone against my ear while tourists walked past my cafe table in Gracia, completely unaware they were witnessing the moment my ex-husband's new life imploded. Then during the cake cutting, this man stood up from one of the back tables. I didn't recognize him at first. He had a beard, looked older, but he walked to the front with this calm confidence like he belonged there. He picked up the microphone and said, Silas's voice cracked. He said his name was Robert Keegan and he was there because his wife forgot to invite him to her wedding. My breath caught. Robert Keegan? The room went completely silent. Victoria went white, not pale, actually white. She grabbed the table for support and her champagne glass fell and shattered. And this man, Robert, he just stood there calmly and said he'd filed for divorce 18 months ago, but Victoria refused to sign the papers. That she told him she'd handle it herself, that she had an attorney, but she never filed anything. That he'd hired a private investigator and discovered his legal wife was planning to marry someone else. I was gripping my phone so hard my hand hurt. Around me, Barcelona continued its Saturday rhythm. Couples sharing tapas, children chasing pigeons, street musicians playing guitar, while Silas described the destruction of everything he'd built after leaving me. He pulled out his phone and showed everyone the marriage certificate. February 14, 2018. Never annulled, never dissolved. He had emails from Victoria from 3 months ago saying she wasn't ready to divorce yet, that she needed time to figure things out. Silas, I said slowly, trying to process what he was telling me. Who is Robert Keegan? The silence stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. Then, Robert Montgomery Keegan. He took both names when they got married. Another pause. Thea, Robert Keegan is my brother. Robert is my brother, and Victoria has been married to him for 7 years. The pieces clicked into place with a clarity that was almost physical. Robert, Silas's older brother who'd moved away 3 years ago after some family falling out. The brother Silas rarely mentioned, whose name had gradually disappeared from conversation until I'd almost forgotten he existed. Your brother Robert who moved to Portland? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Vancouver. He moved to Vancouver to get away from Victoria, from the marriage that was destroying him. And Silas's voice broke completely. I didn't talk to him for 3 years because Victoria convinced me he was toxic. That he was manipulating the family. That keeping distance was healthier for everyone. She engineered the entire falling out, Thea. She systematically isolated him from us so she could move on to me. I sat back in my chair, my untouched coffee growing cold. The woman who'd destroyed my marriage, who'd studied me like a blueprint of inadequacy, who'd stepped into my life before I'd finished packing my belongings. She'd done it all before. To Silas's brother. Using the same playbook. What happened after Robert revealed this? I asked. Chaos. Everyone pulling out phones, people whispering, Victoria shaking her head saying no over and over. My mother was staring at Victoria like she'd never seen her before. My father was demanding to know what was happening. And then Robert. Silas paused. He looked directly at me and said, I think you should know that I'm not just Victoria's husband. I'm also your brother, Silas. Or I was before the family falling out that Victoria engineered to keep us apart. You didn't recognize him? Not at first. The beard, the years apart, but then I really looked and I saw him. My brother. Who I'd cut off because Victoria said he was jealous of my success, bitter about his own failures, trying to sabotage our relationship. And he was standing in my wedding reception telling a room full of people that my bride was still married to him. I could picture the scene so clearly it felt like watching a movie. The elegant hotel ballroom, the shocked guests, Victoria's perfect facade cracking in real time. Part of me felt vindicated. But mostly I felt a strange, detached curiosity about how Victoria had thought she could pull this off. "What did you do?" I asked. "I left. Just walked out." Left Victoria standing there in her wedding dress with 200 witnesses watching everything fall apart. "I've been sitting in my car in the parking lot for, I don't know, an hour? 2 hours. I called you because I needed to know if I knew," I finished. "If I was somehow part of exposing her." "Yes," he said quietly. "I know that sounds insane, but Victoria kept saying afterward that someone must have told Robert, must have planned this, and I thought maybe you." "Silas." I cut him off, keeping my voice level. "I've been in Barcelona for 6 months. I blocked you on social media the day I left Seattle. I had no idea you were getting married today. I didn't even know Victoria's last name until 3 minutes ago. I've spent 6 months deliberately not knowing anything about your life. I know that logically. But I'm sitting here trying to understand how everything I thought was real turned out to be a lie, and you're the only person who might understand what that feels like." The irony wasn't lost on me. Silas calling me his first wife, to process the betrayal of his second wife. The woman he'd left me for had destroyed him in the exact same way she'd destroyed his brother, using the same methods of manipulation and isolation, and now he wanted comfort from the person who'd tried to warn him years ago that something about Victoria didn't feel right. Except I hadn't warned him. I'd been too busy shrinking myself, trying to be good enough, assuming the problem was me. "Did she do this to you too?" Silas asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Did Victoria manipulate you, isolate you, make you feel like you were the problem when really she was just clearing the path to me?" I thought about the last 2 years of our marriage. Victoria appearing more frequently in our lives. Dinners with work people that always included her. Weekend events where Silas needed to attend because Victoria needed his help with presentations. How gradually my friends had stopped being invited. My art shows became scheduling conflicts. My family gatherings were too far to drive for just a weekend. I thought about how Silas had started criticizing everything. My career, my clothes, my priorities. How nothing I did was quite right, quite enough, quite what he needed. How I'd spent 2 years becoming smaller and quieter and more apologetic until I'd almost disappeared entirely. And I thought about how quickly he'd moved on after our divorce. How Victoria had been right there, ready to step into the space I'd left, like she'd been waiting backstage for her cue. "Yes," I said quietly. "She did it to me too." I heard him break. Actually break. The controlled attorney facade that had survived a public wedding disaster finally shattered, and he was just a man who'd lost everything. His marriage, his brother, his dignity, to someone who'd played them all like chess pieces. "I'm sorry," he whispered. I'm so sorry. For everything. For not seeing it. For letting her convince me you were the problem. For not fighting for us when I should have." I looked out at Barcelona. At the Gracia neighborhood I'd come to love, at the cafe where I'd spent countless mornings working on designs, at the life I'd built from the ruins of our marriage. 6 months of learning to take up space again. 6 months of wearing bright colors because I liked them. 6 months of painting for myself, making friends who were loud and messy and exactly the kind of people Silas would have found exhausting. "I'm not sorry," I said, and I meant it. "If you hadn't left me for her, I'd still be in Seattle trying to be someone I'm not, still thinking I was the one who wasn't enough. Victoria destroyed our marriage, but she also freed me to figure out who I actually am. How are you so calm about this?" "Because I'm 6,000 miles away. Because I have a life here that neither of you can touch. Because her destroying our marriage was the best thing that ever happened to me, even though it didn't feel like it at the time." Silas was quiet for a long moment. I could hear traffic in the background, probably the parking lot at the Woodmark Hotel where he'd fled from his ruined wedding. "What do I do now?" "You get a lawyer, a good one, not you, and you make sure that wedding is nullified. You call Robert and apologize for 3 years of being a terrible brother. And you figure out who you are without someone like Victoria telling you who to be. Will you?" He stopped, started again. "Can I call you sometimes? Not to get back together, just, you're the only person who understands." I considered this. 6 months ago I would have said yes immediately, desperate for any connection to him, any sign that I'd mattered. But I'd spent 6 months learning to be alone without being lonely, to build a life that was wholly mine. "No," I said gently. "You need to do this on your own, Silas. You need to sit with it, feel it, figure it out yourself. That's the work. And I need to keep building my life here without being pulled back into your chaos. That's fair. His voice was thick with tears. Are you happy? In Barcelona. I smiled, looking around at the street I'd walked hundreds of times, the cafe where the barista now knew my order, the balcony visible from where I sat where I'd spent countless evenings painting the city that had welcomed me when I had nowhere else to go. I'm getting there, I said. Some days are better than others. But yes, I think I am. Good. You deserve that. We said goodbye, not closure exactly but acknowledgement. I put my phone down and sat there for a long time, processing what had just happened. Victoria's perfect life had imploded in the most public way possible. Silas was facing consequences for choosing her over me, over his brother, over his own judgment. Robert had finally been heard after 3 years of being silenced. Me. I was in Barcelona, exactly where I needed to be, with a life I'd built for myself and a strange sense that the universe had just balanced its books in the most unexpected way. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown Seattle number. This is Robert Montgomery Keegan. Silas gave me your number. I hope that's okay. I wanted to say thank you. I stared at the message, confused, then typed back. Thank you for what? I didn't do anything. His response came quickly. Exactly. You didn't warn them. You didn't interfere. You let the truth surface on its own. Sometimes that's the kindest thing you can do. I stared at Robert's text message, trying to understand what he meant. Thank you for not warning them. You didn't interfere. You let the truth surface on its own. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, unsure how to respond. Around me, the cafe in Gracia continued its Saturday afternoon rhythm. The clinking of coffee cups, conversations in Catalan and Spanish, a street musician setting up his guitar across the plaza. My peaceful Barcelona morning had been interrupted by Silas's call, and now his brother, a man I barely remembered meeting, was thanking me for something I hadn't done. I typed, I still don't understand. I've been in Barcelona for 6 months. I didn't even know about the wedding until you both told me. Robert's response came quickly, like he'd been waiting. Can I call you? This is easier to explain with actual conversation. Before I could decide if I wanted that, my phone was ringing. Robert's number. I answered, still trying to piece together how I'd become part of a story I hadn't been present for. Hi. Thank you for picking up. His voice was different from Silas's, deeper, rougher around the edges without that polished attorney cadence. I know this is strange. You don't know me and I'm calling you on what should be a normal Saturday in your new life. But I needed to talk to someone who'd survived Victoria, and you're the only other person who has. I'm not sure I survived her, I said. I just ran away to another country. That's surviving. Trust me. He paused and I heard traffic noise in the background. I'm actually sitting in a hotel parking lot right now. Left the wedding venue about an hour after my dramatic entrance. Couldn't stay in Seattle tonight. Too many people wanting to dissect what happened. So I drove north, found a hotel near the Canadian border, and I've been sitting here trying to figure out what comes next. I leaned back in my cafe chair, cradling my phone against my shoulder. Silas said Victoria refused to sign divorce papers. That you filed 18 months ago. I did. February of last year. She kept saying she'd handle it herself, that she had an attorney, that I should just be patient. So I waited. And waited. Kept calling her lawyer. Turns out she never hired one. Checked the courts. No filing. Meanwhile, she was already with Silas, already building her next life while keeping me legally tied to her. Why? The question came out sharper than I intended. If she wanted to be with Silas, why not just divorce you? Robert was quiet for a moment. Control, I think. As long as we were married, she had a safety net. If things didn't work out with Silas, she could come back to me, to my connection with the family. Victoria doesn't burn bridges until she's absolutely certain the new bridge is solid. It made sense in a twisted way. Victoria was strategic, calculating. She wouldn't risk being alone or losing status. She'd keep all her options open until the last possible moment. How did you find out about the wedding? I asked. Victoria's assistant. Young woman named Ashley, who'd been helping Victoria juggle the two lives. Scheduling around when I might call, making excuses for why Victoria couldn't attend family events in Vancouver, basically enabling the whole mess. Ashley called me a week ago, said she couldn't live with the guilt anymore. Told me everything. The wedding plans, the venue, the fact that Victoria had filed for a marriage license using her maiden name and claiming to be unmarried. I thought about that assistant, probably in her 20s, watching her boss commit fraud and finally deciding she couldn't be complicit anymore. That took courage. It did. She said she'd been working for Victoria for 2 years and only recently realized the full scope of the deception. She thought Victoria and I were already divorced, that the Seattle relationship was legitimate. When she discovered Victoria had never filed the divorce papers, she panicked. So you decided to show up at the wedding. I spent 6 days debating it, Robert said. I could have just filed charges for bigamy after the fact. Let them get married, then expose it later. But that felt cruel. Not to Victoria, she deserved whatever legal consequences were coming, but to Silas. He's still my brother, even after 3 years of not speaking. I thought he deserved a chance to escape before legally complicating everything. I processed that. Robert had crashed his own wife's wedding to his brother to save that brother from committing fraud. It was either incredibly generous or incredibly messy. Probably both. Silas said Victoria convinced him you were toxic. That you needed distance from the family. Robert laughed, but it was bitter. That's Victoria's specialty, manufacturing conflicts that force people apart. She started small with me. Told my parents I'd said things I never said. Told Silas I was jealous of his success. Created situations where I'd look unstable or unreliable. By the time I realized what was happening, the damage was done. My family believed her version of me instead of the actual me. She did the same thing to my friendships, I said quietly. Made them seem exhausting or dramatic or not worth my time. I didn't realize until I left Seattle and reconnected with people that they'd all been confused about why I'd disappeared. Exactly. Victoria identifies what matters to you, then slowly makes it seem like those things are problems. Your friends, my family, whatever connections might compete with her for attention or provide perspective she can't control. Thought occurred to me. When did you realize what she was doing? Not until I left. I moved to Vancouver thinking I was the problem, that I'd somehow failed at marriage, that my issues were driving Victoria away. I spent a year in therapy trying to understand what was wrong with me before my therapist pointed out that all of Victoria's complaints were contradictory. First I wasn't ambitious enough, then I was too focused on career. First I wasn't social enough, then I was spending too much time with friends. The criticisms kept changing because the point wasn't to help me improve, it was to keep me off balance. I closed my eyes, feeling that description in my bones. Silas did the same thing after Victoria entered our lives. Nothing I did was right, but the definition of right kept shifting. Because you weren't the problem. Victoria was, but she'd convinced Silas to be her spokesperson. Robert paused. Can I ask you something? When did you realize your marriage was over? I thought about that. Honestly, not until I saw a photo of Silas and Victoria at a charity gala 3 weeks after our divorce was finalized. They looked like they'd been together for years. The caption called them a power couple. That's when I understood I'd been replaced long before Silas asked for the divorce. That must have been brutal. It was. But it also freed me in a weird way. I'd spent months thinking I'd failed, that if I'd just been better somehow, we could have made it work. Seeing that photo made me realize no amount of being better would have mattered. Victoria had decided she wanted my life and she was going to take it regardless of what I did. She wanted mine too, Robert said. Or more accurately, she wanted access to my family, specifically to Silas. I was just the stepping stone. We were both quiet for a moment. Two people who'd been used and discarded by the same woman, comparing notes on our mutual destruction. Thea, can I tell you why I texted you? Robert asked. Why I said thank you? Please. Because I genuinely don't understand. You were on the guest list for the wedding. Did you know that? I sat up straighter. What? Victoria had you on the original guest list. Your name was typed in then crossed out by hand. I saw it when Ashley sent me the planning documents. Victoria wanted you there. Or at least she wanted the option of you being there. Probably as some kind of power move. Look what I have now. Look what you lost. That kind of thing. My stomach turned. The thought of sitting in that wedding, watching Silas marry the woman who'd systematically dismantled our marriage, while Victoria smiled at me with false sympathy, it was nauseating. But you weren't there, Robert continued. You were in Barcelona, completely removed from their orbit. If you'd been in Seattle, if you'd been watching their social media, if you'd still been entangled in that world, you might have felt obligated to warn Silas when you found out. You might have tried to stop it quietly, privately, in a way that would have let Victoria spin the narrative. I don't understand why that matters. Because Victoria's whole strategy depends on controlling information and managing perceptions. She needs to be the victim, the misunderstood party, the person everyone feels sorry for. If you'd warned Silas privately, Victoria could have claimed you were lying out of jealousy. She could have manufactured some explanation that made her look sympathetic. But because you weren't there, because you'd completely disconnected from their world, the truth came out naturally. Ashley called me. I showed up with evidence. Victoria couldn't spin it or blame you or make herself the victim. I absorbed that. By removing myself completely, by refusing to engage or monitor or stay connected to Silas's new life, I'd accidentally created the space for Victoria's lies to collapse under their own weight. You let karma do the work, Robert said. That's why I'm thanking you. You didn't plot revenge. You didn't try to expose her. You just left and built a better life, and that absence allowed everything else to happen the way it needed to. I looked around the plaza. At the church, the cafe tables, the locals and tourists mixing in the afternoon sun. 6 months ago I'd been sitting in a Seattle sublet, staring at a photo that proved my husband had replaced me, feeling like my life was ending. Now I was in Barcelona with a career I enjoyed and friends I'd chosen and art I was creating for myself, accidentally participating in the destruction of Victoria's carefully constructed lies simply by not being present. I didn't do it on purpose, I said. The best revenge never is, Robert replied. The best revenge is just living well enough that you forget to check if they're suffering. My coffee had gone completely cold. I flagged down the waiter and ordered another, settling into what was clearly going to be a longer conversation than I'd anticipated. What happens now? I asked. For you, I mean. And for Silas. For me. I'm filing for divorce immediately. This time with documentation that Victoria refused the first attempt and tried to commit bigamy. My attorney thinks it'll be straightforward. For Silas. Robert sighed. That's more complicated. He's my brother. I want to forgive him for believing Victoria over me, for cutting me off for 3 years. But I'm also really angry at how easily he believed her lies. He called me crying, I said. Apologizing for not seeing what Victoria was doing to me, to us, to you. It felt genuine. Guilt is easy. Change is hard. I'll see which one Silas actually commits to. Robert paused. What about you? Are you going to forgive him? The question caught me off guard. I don't know if forgiveness is the right word. I'm not angry anymore, which I guess is a kind of forgiveness. But I also don't want him back in my life, which feels like the opposite of forgiveness. I think you can forgive someone and still choose not to have them in your life, Robert said. Forgiveness doesn't mean reconciliation. It just means you're not carrying their weight anymore. The waiter brought my fresh coffee. I thanked him in Spanish that was getting better but still imperfect and thought about Robert's words. Was I carrying Silas's weight? I didn't think so. Not anymore. Robert, can I ask you something? Are you glad you crashed the wedding? Now that it's done, do you feel better? He considered this. Honestly, I feel hollow. I thought confronting Victoria publicly would give me closure, would make me feel powerful or vindicated. But mostly I just feel tired. And sad for Silas, even though he made his own choices. And grateful to be done with all of it. That's exactly how I felt when I got on the plane to Barcelona, I said. Not triumphant. Just exhausted and ready to be finished with that chapter. Then you're further along than I am. I'm still in the airport, so to speak. Waiting for my flight to whatever comes next. We talked for another 20 minutes. About Vancouver and Barcelona, about starting over, about what it meant to survive someone who'd tried to erase you. By the time we hung up, my second coffee was cold too, and the afternoon sun was starting to slant differently across the plaza. I had a text from Elena. Dinner tonight? I want to hear about your day. I smiled and typed back, you won't believe the day I've had. Elena arrived at my apartment that evening carrying a bottle of wine and the kind of determined expression that meant she wasn't leaving until I told her everything. Your text said I wouldn't believe the day you had, she said, settling onto my small couch while I found wine glasses in the kitchen. So start talking. What happened? I poured the wine and told her. About Silas's call. About Victoria being married to his brother. About Robert's texts and our conversation. About the viral video I'd watched on my balcony that morning showing the moment everything fell apart at a wedding I hadn't been invited to but had apparently been considered for. Elena listened without interrupting, her architect's mind processing the structure of what I was describing. When I finished, she took a long sip of wine and said, "So the woman who destroyed your marriage just had her own marriage destroyed in front of everyone she knows." "Yes. And you had nothing to do with it." "Nothing. I didn't even know it was happening." Elena smiled. "That's perfect. That's absolutely perfect." "Is it?" I set my wine glass down. "Because I feel weird about it. Part of me is glad Victoria got exposed. But part of me feels like I should feel more satisfied than I do." "What do you feel instead?" "I thought about that. Distant. Like I'm watching a TV show about people I used to know but don't really care about anymore." "That's exactly what you should feel," Elena said firmly. "You're not invested in their drama because you built a life that doesn't include them. That's not numbness, that's healing." My phone buzzed on the coffee table. Another message, this time from a number I didn't recognize but with a Seattle area code. I ignored it but Elena noticed. "How many messages have you gotten today?" I stopped counting, around 40. "From people in Seattle?" "Most of them. Old friends, Silas's colleagues, even a few people from the firm who barely spoke to me during my marriage. Everyone suddenly wants to tell me they're sorry, they should have noticed, they realize now what Victoria was doing." Elena made a dismissive sound. "Of course they do. Now that it's safe to see the truth, now that they won't look bad for acknowledging it. Where were these people when you needed them?" "That's not fair," I said, though I wasn't sure why I was defending them. "They didn't know. They didn't want to know. There's a difference." Elena topped off both our wine glasses. "People are very good at not seeing uncomfortable truths when seeing them would require them to do something. Now that Victoria's been exposed and Silas is the victim, everyone can safely admit what they suspected all along." She was right, and it bothered me more than I wanted to admit. How many people had watched me shrink during my marriage and said nothing? How many had seen Victoria's subtle manipulations and chosen to look away because confronting it would have been awkward? My phone buzzed again. This time I looked. Another unknown Seattle number, but the preview of the message caught my attention. "Thea, this is Patricia Montgomery." "Silas's mother," I said out loud. Elena leaned forward. "What does she want?" I opened the message. "Thea, this is Patricia Montgomery. I know you have no reason to take my call, but I need to apologize to you. Could we speak? I have your number from the old family phone tree. Please. This is important." I showed Elena the message. She read it and raised her eyebrows. "The mother-in-law who never liked you wants to apologize. Are you going to call her back?" "I don't know. Part of me wants to hear what she has to say. But part of me thinks engaging with any of them just pulls me back into their world." "What does your gut tell you?" I closed my eyes, trying to feel past the confusion and the wine and the exhaustion from a day that had started so peacefully and turned into this. My gut says she's feeling guilty because Robert came to family dinner and told them everything. She wants absolution, not conversation. Then don't call her back. But even as Elena said it, my phone was ringing. Patricia's number. I stared at it, my finger hovering between answer and decline. "Your phone, your choice," Elena said. "But remember, you don't owe anyone your time, especially not people who made you feel small when you were already struggling." I answered. I still don't know why. Maybe curiosity. Maybe the small hope that hearing Patricia's apology would give me some kind of closure I didn't know I needed. "Thea." Patricia's voice sounded different than I remembered. Smaller, lacking the confident authority she'd always carried. "Thank you for answering. I wasn't sure you would." "I almost didn't," I said honestly. "I wouldn't have blamed you." She paused and I heard her take a shaky breath. "Robert came to dinner yesterday. Sunday dinner at our house in Phoenix. First time in 3 years we've all been together. He told us everything." I waited, saying nothing. "He told us how Victoria manipulated the family situation. How she created conflicts that made him look unstable so we'd support her when she pushed for distance between him and Silas. How she systematically isolated him while positioning herself as the daughter-in-law we'd always wanted." Patricia's voice cracked. "And we believed her. We believed every word because she told us what we wanted to hear. That Robert was struggling, that distance was healthy, that she was trying to help him while protecting Silas. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "Because after Robert explained the pattern with him, I started seeing the same pattern with you. How Victoria would express concern about your marriage at family dinners. How she'd say things like, 'Thea seems overwhelmed,' or, 'I worry Silas doesn't have the support he needs at home.' How she'd compliment you in ways that somehow made you sound inadequate." Patricia was crying now, her words coming between gasps. "I said terrible things about you, Thea. I told Silas you were holding him back from partnership. I made that comment at your anniversary dinner about how successful couples operate as a team while looking right at you. I believed Victoria when she painted you as the problem because it confirmed what I'd already thought, that Silas had married wrong." Elena was watching me carefully, reading my expressions. I kept my face neutral, not wanting to show how much Patricia's words were affecting me. "I'm sorry," Patricia said. "I'm so sorry for how I treated you. For believing Victoria's lies. For not seeing that she was poisoning my view of you so she could take your place. You deserved better from me. From all of us." I looked out my apartment window at Barcelona settling into evening, lights coming on in other apartments, people heading home from work, the city transitioning from day to night with the easy rhythm I'd come to love. This life was mine. This peace was mine. And Patricia's apology, however genuine it might be, couldn't change the past or give me back the years I'd spent feeling inadequate in her eyes. "I appreciate you calling," I said carefully. "I do. But Patricia, I need you to understand something. I've spent 6 months rebuilding myself. Figuring out who I am without Silas, without your family, without Seattle. And I won't, let this situation pull me back into that world." "I'm not asking you to come back," Patricia said quickly. "I'm just asking for your forgiveness. I don't know if I can give you that right now. Maybe someday. But right now, I'm still learning how to exist without feeling like I need to earn anyone's approval." Patricia was quiet for a long moment. "That's fair. That's more than fair. But Thea, can I tell you one more thing?" I almost said no. Almost hung up and blocked the number and went back to my peaceful Barcelona evening. But something in her tone made me say, "Okay." "Robert showed us photos yesterday. Photos Victoria had deleted from the family cloud but he'd saved. Photos of you at family gatherings from the early years of your marriage, before Victoria entered the picture. You looked so alive in those photos. Happy, confident, like you belonged. And then we looked at more recent photos from the last 2 years and you looked like a ghost. Like you were fading away right in front of us." My hand tightened on the phone. "I didn't see it when it was happening," Patricia continued. "Or I saw it and convinced myself you were just adjusting to Silas's career demands, becoming more mature, growing up. But looking at those photos side by side yesterday, I couldn't deny what I was seeing. Victoria drained the life out of you, and we let her do it because she was telling us you were the problem." Elena reached over and squeezed my free hand. She couldn't hear Patricia's words, but she could see what they were doing to me. "Robert said you moved to Barcelona," Patricia said. "Started over completely. Are you happy there?" It was the same question Silas had asked. But coming from Patricia it felt different. Less about guilt and more about genuine curiosity. "I'm getting there," I said. "Some days are better than others. But yes, I think I'm happy." "Good. You deserve that." Patricia paused. "I won't call you again. I just needed you to know that we see it now. All of it. And we're sorry we didn't see it sooner." After we hung up, I sat on the couch next to Elena, both of us quiet. She refilled my wine glass without asking if I wanted more. "How do you feel?" she finally asked. "Tired. Vindicated. Angry that it took Victoria trying to commit bigamy for people to believe what she was capable of." I took a sip of wine. "But also relieved, I think. That I'm not crazy. That what I experienced was real and other people finally see it." "You were never crazy," Elena said firmly. "You were just surrounded by people who benefited from believing Victoria instead of trusting what they could see with their own eyes." My phone buzzed again. Another message, this time from Jenna. "I know you're probably overwhelmed, but I need you to know I'm sorry. I should have fought harder to stay in your life. I should have told you I noticed you changing. I was a bad friend and I want to be better if you'll let me." I showed the message to Elena. She read it and said, "Are you going to respond?" "Eventually. But not tonight. Tonight I just want to sit here with you and drink wine and remember that I have a whole life here that Victoria never touched. Elena lifted her glass. To lives Victoria never touched. We clinked glasses and drank, and I felt something settle in my chest. Not closure exactly, but maybe the beginning of understanding that the best revenge wasn't Victoria's public humiliation or Patricia's guilty apology or even Silas's devastation. The best revenge was this: sitting in my Barcelona apartment with a friend I'd chosen, drinking wine I'd picked out, living a life I'd built entirely for myself. A life where Victoria Ashford was just a name from my past instead of the architect of my present. My phone kept buzzing throughout the evening. More messages, more apologies, more people suddenly seeing what they'd missed. But I put it on silent and focused on Elena, on our conversation about everything except Seattle and Silas and Victoria. When Elena finally left around midnight, I stood on my balcony looking out at the Gracia neighborhood. Tomorrow I'd deal with the messages. Tomorrow I'd figure out how to respond to people who wanted forgiveness or connection or just to feel less guilty about their silence. But tonight I just existed in the life I'd chosen. And that felt like enough. Tuesday morning I woke to find my phone had died overnight, still on silent from when I'd muted it during Elena's visit. I plugged it in and watched as notification after notification loaded. 37 new messages, 12 missed calls, voicemails I'd never listened to. I made coffee and carried it to my balcony, leaving my phone inside. The Gracia neighborhood was waking up around me. The bakery on the corner opening its doors, the smell of fresh bread drifting up to my fourth-floor apartment, children walking to school with their parents, old men setting up their dominoes game at the cafe across the street. This was my life now. This quiet morning routine. This city that didn't know or care about Seattle's latest scandal. And I realized I wanted to keep it that way. I spent the morning working on a design project for Global Reach, a brand identity for a sustainable fashion startup in Amsterdam. The work required focus, which was exactly what I needed. Colors and typography and the clean logic of visual hierarchy. Problems I could solve without emotion, without history, without the weight of other people's expectations. Around noon, Christina messaged me on Slack. "Saw you're online. How's the Amsterdam project coming?" I updated her on my progress, sent over preliminary mock-ups, waited for feedback. Her response came quickly. "This is excellent. Bold without being aggressive. Exactly what the client needs. Also, and this is completely separate from work. Are you okay? I saw something on LinkedIn about a Seattle attorney's wedding disaster, and some of the comments mentioned your name." I stared at the message. The story had reached LinkedIn. Had reached Germany. Had reached my boss, who'd hired me specifically because my portfolio showed talent, not because she knew anything about my personal life. I typed back, "I'm fine. Long story involving my ex-husband and his terrible choice in women. Doesn't affect my work. I wasn't worried about your work. I was worried about you." The simple kindness of that statement made my throat tight. "Thank you. I'm actually okay. It's weird, but I'm okay." "Good. Take the afternoon off if you need it. The Amsterdam project isn't due until Friday." But I didn't take the afternoon off. I worked because working kept me grounded, kept me focused on something I could control. By 3 p.m., I'd finished the preliminary designs and sent them to Christina for review. Then I finally looked at my phone. Most of the messages were variations on the same theme. People from Seattle expressing shock, offering support, apologizing for not seeing Victoria's manipulation sooner. I scrolled through them with increasing detachment, realizing that these messages weren't really for me. They were for the senders, absolving themselves of guilt, performing the concern they should have shown years ago. But one message stood out. From Robert. "My lawyer says Victoria finally signed the divorce papers. She doesn't want to fight it. Her attorney advised that fighting would only make the criminal investigation worse. It should be final in about 60 days. Strange how the end of a 7-year marriage comes down to signatures and paperwork and lawyers advising you to give up." I called him instead of texting back. He answered on the first ring. "Hey," he said, sounding tired. "Didn't expect to hear your voice. How are you doing?" I asked. "Really doing, not the version you tell people who are checking in." He was quiet for a moment. "Honestly, I feel hollow. I thought confronting Victoria publicly would give me closure, would make me feel powerful or vindicated. But mostly I just feel exhausted. And sad for Silas, even though he made his own choices. And grateful to be almost done with all of it." "That's exactly how I felt when I got on the plane to Barcelona," I said. Not triumphant. Just tired and ready to be finished with that chapter. When does it stop feeling heavy? Robert asked. When do you wake up and not immediately think about everything that happened? I looked around my apartment, at the paintings I'd hung, at the art supplies spread across my dining table, at the view of Barcelona from my balcony. I don't know if it ever completely stops, but it gets quieter. The thoughts become background noise instead of the main event. You start having days where you forget to think about it until evening, then eventually you have days where you don't think about it at all. I want that, Robert said quietly. I want a day where Victoria isn't the first thing I think about when I wake up. You'll get there. It just takes time and distance and probably therapy. Already started therapy, he said. First session was Monday. Spent most of it crying in a stranger's office while she took notes and made sympathetic sounds. That's what the first few sessions are for. Eventually you'll get to the part where you start understanding the patterns instead of just feeling them. Did therapy help you? I thought about the therapist I'd seen in Seattle for 3 months before leaving. It helped me understand that leaving wasn't giving up. That sometimes the healthiest thing you can do is walk away from people who make you feel like you're not enough. Silas called me yesterday, Robert said, changing the subject. First time we've actually talked since the wedding. He apologized for 3 years of silence. Said he'd been wrong to believe Victoria over me, wrong to cut me off without hearing my side. How did that feel? Complicated. Part of me wanted to tell him I forgave him immediately, that we could just move on. But another part was angry that it took Victoria trying to commit bigamy for him to believe me. Like my word wasn't enough, but her very public failure was. I understood that completely. What did you say? I told him I needed time. That I was glad he finally saw the truth, but that rebuilding our relationship would take more than one apology. He seemed to understand. Or at least he said he did. We talked for another half hour about therapy and healing and what it meant to forgive people who'd hurt you through willful blindness. When we hung up, I felt less alone in the strange space of processing revenge I hadn't asked for. That evening I met Elena at a small gallery in Poblano. She'd been insisting for weeks that I should show my Barcelona doorway painting somewhere, and she'd finally arranged a meeting with the gallery owner, a woman in her 50s named Carla who specialized in work by local and expat artists. These are beautiful, Carla said, flipping through photos of my watercolors on my phone. Very detailed, very emotional. You see the city the way people who live here see it, not like a tourist. That's what I was trying to capture, I said. The everyday beauty. The doors people walk through without noticing. Would you be interested in a group show? Carla asked. I'm curating something for January. Small works, local artists, theme of transitions and doorways. Metaphorical and literal. Your paintings would fit perfectly. I looked at Elena, who was smiling like she'd known this would happen. I'd love that, I said. After we left the gallery, Elena and I walked along the beach in Barceloneta, the Mediterranean dark and calm beside us. You're doing it, Elena said. Building the life you wanted. I'm trying. No, you are. You have work you enjoy. You have art you're creating. You're showing in a gallery. You have friends here. This is the life you were supposed to have before Victoria convinced you to be smaller. I stopped walking, looking out at the water. Can I tell you something? Something I haven't told anyone else. Always. I don't feel satisfied about Victoria's wedding disaster. I know I should. I know everyone expects me to be glad she got exposed. But mostly I just feel distant from it. Like it happened to characters in a story I read instead of real people I knew. That's because they're not real people to you anymore, Elena said gently. They're part of your past and you've moved so far forward that their drama can't touch you. That's not numbness, that's healing. Then why do people keep asking if I'm going back to Silas? Why does everyone assume that now that he knows the truth, I'll want him back? Elena turned to face me fully. Because people are obsessed with reconciliation stories. They want the satisfying ending where the wronged wife gets vindication and the apologetic husband, and everyone lives happily ever after. But that's not what healing actually looks like. Healing looks like you standing on a Barcelona beach, more concerned about your gallery show than your ex-husband's drama. I smiled despite myself. When did you get so wise? 2 years of therapy after my divorce. Very expensive wisdom. She linked her arm through mine and we started walking again. The question everyone should be asking isn't whether you'll go back to Silas. It's whether you're happy with the life you've built without him. And am I? You tell me. I thought about my apartment, my work, my upcoming gallery show, the friendships I'd built with Elena and her circle. I thought about Saturday mornings at the market and coffee at my favorite cafe and the way Barcelona had become home without me noticing the exact moment it happened. Yes, I said. I think I am happy. Not perfectly, not completely, but genuinely happy in a way I wasn't for years before I left. Then that's your answer to everyone who asks about Silas. You're not going back because you're already exactly where you want to be. We walked the rest of the beach in comfortable silence and I felt something settle in my chest. The revenge I'd gotten without planning wasn't about Victoria's public humiliation or Silas's guilt or even all the people apologizing for not seeing what was happening. The revenge was this, being happy without them. Building a life so full that their drama became background noise. Standing on a beach in Barcelona talking about my gallery show instead of obsessing over what my ex-husband was doing 6,000 miles away. That night I finally responded to Jenna's message about reconciliation. I'm not going back to Seattle or to Silas. I'm building something here that's entirely mine and I'm not giving it up. But I appreciate you asking. How are you? Her response came quickly. I'm proud of you. And I miss you. Can I come visit? I want to see this life you've built. I smiled and typed back, yes. Come visit. I'll show you my Barcelona. Then I put my phone away and opened my laptop, pulling up the Barcelona doorway paintings I'd been working on. I had 3 months until the gallery show. 3 months to create enough work to fill a wall. 3 months to prove that the best revenge wasn't destruction. It was creation. Outside my window, Barcelona was settling into night. Somewhere in Seattle, Silas was probably still processing the implosion of his wedding. Victoria was probably dealing with legal consequences and professional fallout. Robert was probably lying awake in Vancouver, trying to figure out who he was without the weight of a failed marriage. But I was here painting doorways in a city that had welcomed me when I had nowhere else to go. And that felt like exactly where I was supposed to be. The painting was almost finished when my phone rang Wednesday evening. I'd been working on a watercolor of a door in the Gothic Quarter. Deep blue wood with brass fixtures, worn stone steps, a ceramic number plate that had probably been there for a century. The kind of detail that required steady hands and patience, both of which vanished when I saw Robert's name on my screen. I wiped my hands on a rag and answered. Hey, can you talk? His voice was different than our previous conversations, tighter, more controlled, like he was holding something back. Of course. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong exactly. Things are just moving faster than I expected. He paused and I heard papers rustling. My attorney filed the new divorce papers today. This time we included everything. Documentation that Victoria refused to sign the previous filing, evidence of her continued representation as a single woman despite our legal marriage, proof she attempted bigamy with the marriage license application. I set down my paintbrush, giving him my full attention. How long until it's final? 60 days if Victoria doesn't contest it. My attorney thinks she won't. Her lawyer advised her that fighting would only make things worse. But that's not why I called. He took a breath. The prosecutor's office is reviewing the case for criminal charges. Criminal charges against Victoria? Bigamy is a felony in Washington. She signed a marriage license application claiming to be unmarried while still legally married to me. That's fraud against the state, perjury on an official document. And because she used her maiden name Ashford professionally while her legal name was Keegan, there are questions about whether she committed fraud on business contracts too. I tried to process what this meant. Victoria hadn't just destroyed her personal life, she'd potentially committed multiple crimes that could follow her for years. Meridian is reviewing every document she signed as CFO, Robert continued. Every loan application, every corporate filing, every contract. If she signed as Victoria Ashford when her legal name was Victoria Keegan, the company could face liability. They're talking about suing her for misrepresentation and breach of fiduciary duty. I searched for the right word. That's catastrophic. It is. And I should feel satisfied about it. I should feel like justice is being served. But mostly I just feel exhausted. I wanted Victoria to face consequences, but I didn't want to be the instrument of her complete destruction. I just wanted to be free of her. I understood that completely. The revenge fantasy versus the reality of watching someone's life implode in real time. They felt very different. "How's Silas handling all this?" I asked, though I wasn't sure why I cared. "Not well. He called me yesterday. Asked if there was any way to make this go away quietly, to protect Victoria from the worst of the legal consequences. I told him that ship sailed when she tried to commit bigamy in front of 150 witnesses." Robert's voice hardened slightly. "He's still trying to save her even after everything she did. Part of me respects that loyalty. Part of me thinks he's an idiot." After we hung up, I sat at my dining table looking at the half-finished painting. The door I'd been working on represented Barcelona to me. Beautiful, detailed, with a history I didn't fully know but could appreciate anyway. Unlike Seattle, where I knew too much history, where every street corner held a memory of becoming smaller. My phone buzzed with a text from Jenna. "Are you seeing what's happening with Victoria? It's everywhere. Seattle's legal community is in full gossip mode." I hadn't been checking. Hadn't opened Twitter or Instagram in days. Hadn't searched Victoria's name to see what new information had emerged. The distance I'd felt earlier in the week had solidified into genuine disinterest. But curiosity made me open Twitter. The hashtag Seattle wedding scandal was still trending locally. New information had emerged throughout the week, each revelation worse than the last. A leaked resignation letter from Meridian Development, carefully worded but clearly negotiated through lawyers. Victoria, pursuing other opportunities, and focusing on personal matters, corporate speak for "leave before we fire you and make it worse." Her LinkedIn profile had vanished completely. The Instagram account that had been her carefully curated showcase of success, gone. Not private, deleted. The digital erasure of a life she'd spent years constructing. Someone had posted screenshots of legal filings. Meridian's lawsuit against Victoria for misrepresentation. The Bar Association opening an investigation into Silas's conflict of interest, dating a client's CFO while his firm represented that client. Victoria's landlord filing eviction proceedings. The comments were vicious in their schadenfreude. People who'd worked with Victoria came forward with stories I recognized too well. Colleagues she'd undermined, projects she'd sabotaged, reputations she'd destroyed while maintaining her own image as the competent professional everyone could trust. A former Meridian employee had created a Twitter thread that had gone semi-viral. Thread. Working with Victoria Ashford taught me everything about professional manipulation. Here's what I learned. I scrolled through it, reading descriptions of Victoria's tactics. How she'd identify ambitious colleagues and position herself as their mentor, then slowly sabotage them while seeming helpful. How she'd take credit for team successes and blame team members for failures. How she'd manufacture conflicts between co-workers to prevent them from comparing notes about her behavior. It was the same playbook she'd used in personal relationships, applied to professional settings. Victoria had one strategy that she deployed everywhere. Identify what people wanted, become the person who could provide it, then use that dependency to control and eventually betray them. My phone rang. Jenna, this time not texting. "Have you been watching this unfold?" she asked without preamble. "I'm looking at Twitter now. It's insane. Everyone who ever worked with Victoria is coming forward with stories. It's like the wedding disaster gave people permission to finally talk about what she was really like." "Why are you calling me about this?" I asked, not unkindly. Jenna was quiet for a moment. "Because I wanted to make sure you're okay. This is a lot of vindication happening very publicly, and I know that can be complicated to process." "I'm fine," I said and realized I meant it. "I'm actually painting. Working on pieces for a gallery show in January." "A gallery show?" Jenna's voice shifted from concern to genuine excitement. "Thea, that's amazing. Why didn't you tell me?" "Because it just happened last week. And because I've been deliberately not thinking about Seattle and Victoria and all of this." "But aren't you glad?" Jenna pressed. "Aren't you satisfied that everyone finally sees what she did?" I looked at my painting. The blue door, the worn stone, the Barcelona street that had nothing to do with Seattle or my past. "I'm glad the truth came out. I'm glad Robert is getting free. I'm glad Silas finally understands what happened. But satisfied? I don't know. Mostly I just feel distant from all of it." "How can you feel distant? This is about you. About what she did to you." "It was about me." Past tense. Now it's about Victoria facing consequences for her own choices, and I'm just a footnote in someone else's story. Jenna didn't understand. I could hear the confusion in her silence. She wanted me to be triumphant, vindicated, glowing with satisfaction that my enemy had fallen. But I'd moved past needing that satisfaction. I should go, I said gently. I'm in the middle of painting and the light is perfect right now. After we hung up, I turned my phone completely off. Put it in a drawer in my bedroom where I wouldn't be tempted to check it. Then I went back to my painting and lost myself in the details of a door I'd walked past dozens of times without really seeing. Elena came by around 9 that evening with takeout from a Moroccan place nearby. She took one look at my painting progress and smiled. You're in the zone, she said, unpacking tagine and couscous on my dining table. Good. That's where you should be. I washed my hands and joined her at the table. Everyone keeps asking if I'm satisfied about Victoria's consequences. If I'm glad she's losing everything. Are you? I don't know. Thought I would be. I spent months fantasizing about Victoria getting exposed, about Silas realizing what he'd lost, about everyone seeing the truth. But now that it's happening, I just feel removed from it. Elena served us both food, her movements efficient and practical. That's because you've already moved on. Victoria's destruction isn't your climax, it's her ending. You've already had your climax and resolution. You left Seattle, built this life, found yourself again. Victoria's consequences are just epilogue to a story you've already finished. I sat with that thought while we ate. He was right. The most important part of my story had already happened. The leaving, the rebuilding, the slow realization that I could be happy without Silas, without Seattle, without any of the life I'd thought I needed. Can I tell you what I think the real revenge is? Elena asked, pouring us both wine. Please. The real revenge is that you're sitting here eating Moroccan food and talking about your gallery show instead of obsessively tracking Victoria's downfall. The real revenge is that she's become irrelevant to your happiness. She destroyed your marriage thinking she was taking something valuable, but what she actually did was free you to build something better. When did you become so wise about revenge? I asked, smiling. After my divorce, I spent a year trying to make Carlos jealous. Dating men I didn't like, posting photos of my fabulous life, making sure mutual friends told him how well I was doing. Then one day I realized I was still letting him control my choices. I was still performing for his attention even though we were divorced. Real freedom came when I stopped caring whether he noticed. I raised my glass. To not caring whether they notice. We clinked glasses and drank, and I felt something final settle in my chest. Victoria's life was imploding in Seattle. Silas was struggling with guilt and professional consequences. Robert was nearly free. And I was in Barcelona, eating Moroccan food with a friend, working on paintings for a gallery show, living a life that had nothing to do with any of them. That night, after Elena left, I stood on my balcony looking out at the Gracia neighborhood. Lights in windows, people moving through their evenings, the city existing without drama or scandal or revenge. Just life happening at its own pace. My phone was still off, buried in a drawer. Tomorrow I might turn it on and deal with whatever messages had accumulated. Or maybe I wouldn't. Maybe I'd spend the day painting instead, finishing the blue door piece and starting the next one. The choice was mine. That was the real power, not Victoria's destruction but my complete freedom to ignore it. To care or not care on my own terms, according to my own timeline, without reference to anyone else's expectations. I went back inside and returned to my painting, working by lamplight until my eyes grew tired. The door was taking shape, intricate, detailed, beautiful in its ordinariness. Just like the life I was building, one careful brushstroke at a time. The painting of the blue door was finally finished when my phone lit up with Silas's text Sunday evening. I'd been standing back from my dining table, examining the watercolor from different angles, deciding if it needed any final touches. The Mediterranean light I tried to capture looked right. Warm but not harsh, the kind of afternoon glow that made Barcelona feel golden. I was reaching for my phone to take a photo when the message appeared. Can we talk? I need to see you. I'll fly to Barcelona if that's what it takes. Please, Thea. I read it 3 times, each time feeling a different emotion. First surprise. Silas wanted to fly 6,000 miles to see me. Then irritation. Of course he thought he could just show up in my carefully constructed new life. Finally, clarity. This was the moment I'd been preparing for without knowing it. The old Thea would have said yes immediately. Would have felt obligated to give him closure, to hear his apology in person, to offer comfort because that's what 9 years of marriage had trained me to do. But 6 months in Barcelona had taught me something crucial. I didn't owe anyone access to my peace. I didn't text back. I called him instead, wanting him to hear my voice so there would be no ambiguity. Thea. He answered so quickly I knew he'd been waiting, staring at his phone, hoping. Thank you for calling. I know I don't deserve. Silas, I don't want you to come to Barcelona. Silence. Then, please. I just need a chance to explain in person. To show you that I understand now. That I see what Victoria did, what I let her do. 5 minutes. Just give me 5 minutes face to face. I walked to my balcony while he talked, looking out at the street I'd come to know so well. The cafe where I had coffee most mornings. The bakery that made the perfect croissants. The flower seller who always smiled when I walked past. This was my life. Built from nothing, claimed from the ruins of our marriage. You've already explained, I said. You called me 2 Saturdays ago. You apologized. I accepted that apology. There's nothing more that needs to be said in person. But there is. His voice took on that persuasive attorney quality I knew too well. I miss you. I know I don't have the right to miss you after what I did, but I do. And I've been thinking a lot about this. I think we could try again. Now that I understand what Victoria did, now that I see how she manipulated both of us. We could start fresh. I closed my eyes against the audacity of it. Silas. I could move to Barcelona, he continued, building momentum. Or you could come back to Seattle. I know that's asking a lot, but hear me out. Or we could find somewhere new together. New York, London, somewhere neither of us has history. We could rebuild what we had before Victoria destroyed it. Silas, stop. He stopped. I don't want to try again. Not now. Not ever. Not because I hate you, but because I finally like myself and I can't risk losing that again. You wouldn't lose yourself. I'd make sure of it. I'd support your art, your career, your choices. I'd be different this time. I swear I'd be different. I sat down on my balcony chair, phone pressed against my ear, trying to find words for something I'd only just figured out myself. That's the problem. You're still talking about what you would do. What you'd give me permission to be. What you'd allow. But I don't need your permission anymore. I don't need you to support my choices because my choices aren't subject to your approval. He was quiet for a long moment. I don't understand. I know you don't. That's exactly why I can't come back. Then help me understand. Please, Thea. Just tell me what you want. I looked around my apartment, at the finished painting on my dining table, at the art supplies I'd used every day this week, at the invitation from Carla's gallery tacked to my wall. I want to stay in Barcelona. I want to keep working for global reach on projects I find meaningful instead of impressive. I want to have coffee with Elena and practice my terrible Spanish. I want to show my paintings at a gallery in January. I want to date eventually, maybe when I'm ready, but casually without thinking about marriage or building a shared life. I want to exist without performing existence. Those are small things, Silas said, and I could hear genuine confusion in his voice. Barcelona, coffee with friends, a small gallery show. Those are nice, but they're not a life. They're not a partnership. They're not what we had. And there was the fundamental disconnect I'd been trying to articulate. You're right, I said. They're not what we had. What we had was me slowly disappearing while you barely noticed because you were too busy deciding I wasn't enough. These small things. They're everything to me. They're the life I couldn't have when I was with you. I never stopped you from having coffee with friends or making art. You didn't have to explicitly forbid it. Your disappointment was enough. Every time I mentioned my art collective, you'd get that look. Like I was wasting my time on hobbies instead of building something serious. Every time Jenna called, you'd mention afterward how exhausting she was. Every time I suggested visiting my family, you'd have some important work thing that meant I'd have to go alone. You never said, don't do these things. You just made me feel worthless for wanting them. I heard him take a shaky breath. I didn't realize I was doing that. I know. That's why it worked. We were both quiet. I could hear traffic in the background on his end. He was probably in his car somewhere, having this conversation in a parking lot or pulled over on some Seattle street. Thea, he said finally, his voice small. I loved you. I still love you. Doesn't that count for something? It counts for a lot. It means our marriage mattered, that those 9 years weren't a complete waste. But love isn't enough if it comes with constant disappointment that I'm not someone else. I was wrong about who I wanted you to be. I see that now. Maybe you do. But I can't take the risk of going back to find out. I've worked too hard to like myself again. Silas was crying now. I could hear it in his breathing, in the pauses between words. I don't know how to accept this. I don't know how to let you go. You already did. Last February when you asked for a divorce. You let me go then. I'm just declining your attempt to take it back. That's not fair. Maybe not. But it's honest. We talked for another 20 minutes, going in circles. Silas making arguments about second chances and learning from mistakes. Me gently but firmly holding my boundary. Finally, I could hear the exhaustion in both our voices. I should go, I said. I have work tomorrow and it's getting late here. Can I call you again? He asked. Not about reconciling. To stay in your life somehow. I thought about that. 6 months ago I would have said yes immediately, grateful for any connection to him. But I'd learned something important in Barcelona. Closure didn't come from maintaining contact with people who'd hurt you. It came from building a life so full you didn't need them anymore. I don't think that's a good idea, I said. Not now. Maybe someday we can be friendly acquaintances who check in occasionally. But right now, you need to process losing Victoria and this whole disaster without using me as your emotional support. And I need to keep building my life without being pulled back into yours. That's really it then. This is goodbye. This is goodbye, I agreed. Take care of yourself, Silas. I mean that. After we hung up, I sat on my balcony for a long time watching Barcelona settle into evening. I felt lighter somehow, like I'd been carrying something heavy without realizing it and had finally set it down. My laptop was still open on my dining table. I saw an email notification from Robert, sent about an hour ago. The subject line, "Thank you." I opened it and read his message about Silas calling him earlier, asking for support about reconciling with me. About how Robert had told him that trying to come back was selfish, that I'd left to run toward myself, not away from him. You spent 6 months reclaiming your confidence and sense of self, Robert had written. Silas wanting you back would just start the whole cycle again. I told him that even though he's my brother and I want him to be happy, sometimes the kindest thing you can do for someone is tell them the truth they don't want to hear. I typed a response, "Thank you for that." Silas just called me, asked to visit Barcelona to try again. I said no. Robert replied almost immediately, "How do you feel?" I thought about that question. Really thought about it. Relieved, I typed. And guilty about feeling relieved. And then annoyed at myself for feeling guilty. That's normal. You spent 9 years putting his feelings first. Give yourself permission to feel relieved without guilt. Then he added, "My divorce will be final in about 60 days. I'm thinking about taking a trip after. Maybe Barcelona. Would that be weird?" I smiled at my phone. Not weird. Let me know when. Elena and I can show you around. The next morning I had my monthly video call with Christina. We reviewed current projects. The Amsterdam startup had loved my designs, wanted to move forward with full implementation. A new client in Copenhagen needed branding work. Everything was progressing smoothly. Then at the end of the call, Christina said something unexpected. "The leadership team has been very impressed with your work these past 6 months. We'd like to offer you a permanent position instead of the contract arrangement. Better benefits, a small team to lead more interesting projects. You'd be our Mediterranean Region Creative Director." Mediterranean Region Creative Director. A title that would have seemed insignificant to Silas, not impressive enough, not prestigious enough. But to me it was perfect. "I accept," I said. "I want to stay." After the call ended, I sat at my dining table looking at the finished blue door painting. 6 months ago I'd arrived in Barcelona with 4 suitcases and a broken sense of self. Now I had a permanent job I loved, a gallery show in January, friends I'd chosen, a life I'd built entirely for myself. My phone buzzed with a text from Elena. "Coffee this afternoon? Want to discuss gallery plans?" I replied, "Yes." Also, I officially accepted the permanent position at Global Reach. "I'm staying." Her response was immediate. "I knew you would. Barcelona chose you just as much as you chose Barcelona." I looked around my small apartment. Not impressive by Seattle standards, not the kind of place Silas would have considered appropriate for a senior associate's wife. But it was mine. The paintings on the walls, the art supplies on the table, the view from the balcony, the neighborhood I'd learned to navigate, the language I was slowly learning, the life I was deliberately creating. Silas had asked what I wanted and I'd told him. But sitting there in my Barcelona apartment with permanent employment and a gallery show and friends waiting to have coffee, I realized I'd undersold it. What I wanted wasn't small. It was everything. It was freedom to exist without apology, to create without judgment, to build a life according to my own definition of success rather than someone else's disappointment. And I had it. Finally, completely wholly I had it. The invitation from Carla's gallery arrived in my email 3 months after I'd told Silas no. Group show, thresholds and transitions. Opening reception, April 15th, 7 p.m. Featured artists. My name was on the list. 12 watercolors of Barcelona doorways would hang on a gallery wall in Poblenou for anyone who wanted to see them. I stared at the invitation for a long time, then forwarded it to my sister Maya with a simple message. My first real art show. Wish you could be here. Her response came an hour later, middle of the night in Portland. We're coming. All of us. Kids, Marcus, the whole family. You're not doing this alone. I cried reading that text. Not sad tears, the opposite. The kind of crying that comes from realizing you're not invisible anymore, that people see you and choose to show up. April arrived with that particular Barcelona light I'd learned to recognize. Golden without being harsh, warm without being brutal. The kind of light that made everything look softer, more forgiving. I spent the week before the opening finishing my last 2 paintings, framing all 12 pieces with Elena's help, trying not to think too much about people actually looking at my work and having opinions about it. They're going to love them, Elena said as we carried the frames to her car Friday afternoon. They're good, Thea. Really good. You see the city the way people who belong here see it. What if no one comes except you and your friends? Then you'll have a small, intimate show with people who care about you. That's not failure, that's community. The gallery opening was Saturday evening. Maya and her family had arrived that morning, jet-lagged but determined. My niece Emma was 9 now, old enough to have opinions about art. My nephew Lucas was 6 and mostly interested in whether Barcelona had good playgrounds. I met them for lunch at a cafe in Alborn, watching Maya look around with the expression of someone trying to understand how her sister had ended up here in this life so far from everything familiar. It's beautiful, she said finally. Not just the city. You look different. Lighter. I feel different. Mom wanted me to tell you she's sorry she couldn't come. Dad's surgery is next week and she didn't want to leave him. I know. She sent me a video message. It made me cry. Maya reached across the table and squeezed my hand. I'm proud of you. For leaving, for starting over, for doing this. She gestured vaguely at Barcelona around us. For choosing yourself. That evening, standing outside Carla's gallery in Poblenou, I felt my stomach flip with nerves. Through the window I could see my paintings already hung, soft lighting making the colors glow. People were starting to arrive. Elena's architect friends, other artists from the community, some of my global reach colleagues who'd wanted to support me. Robert was there too. He'd flown in from Vancouver 3 days earlier, staying in a small hotel in Gracia, spending his time walking the city and meeting Elena and me for coffee. His divorce had been finalized 2 months ago. He looked different than the last time I'd seen him on a video call. More settled, less haunted. Ready? Maya asked, linking her arm through mine. No. But let's go anyway. The opening was small but warm. Maybe 30 people throughout the evening, filtering in and out, wine glasses in hand, studying my paintings of Barcelona doorways. I watched people look at my work. Really look, taking time with each piece, and felt something expand in my chest. Robert stood in front of the painting of the blue door in Gracia for a long time before calling me over. This is my hotel, he said. I walked past this door every day this week, but I never really saw it until I saw your painting. You notice things other people miss. That's what 6 months of trying to disappear will do, I said. You start paying attention to doorways, wondering what's on the other side. And now you're on the other side, Robert said. You walked through. Maya approached with Emma, who'd been studying each painting with serious concentration. Anthea, why did you only paint doors? Why not whole buildings? Because doors are transitions, I said. They're the moment between one place and another. Between who you were and who you're becoming. Emma nodded like this made perfect sense. I like the blue one best. It looks happy. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I almost ignored it, but something made me check. A text from a number I'd deleted months ago but still recognized. Jenna told me about your gallery show. Congratulations. I mean that sincerely. I hope you're happy, Thea. You deserve to be. Silas. Texting me for the first time since our phone call 3 months ago. I stepped outside the gallery into the cool April evening and typed back. Thank you. I hope you're finding your way too. His response came quickly. I'm trying. Started therapy finally. Reconnected with Robert. We had dinner last week, first time in years we actually talked. Realized how much Victoria had poisoned even before she got between us. Anyway, I won't bother you again. Just wanted you to know I'm genuinely glad you're doing well. I showed the exchange to Robert when I went back inside. He read it and smiled slightly. He's getting there. Still has work to do, but he's trying. Are you okay? I asked. With him texting me? I'm fine. Silas is my brother. I want him to heal even if he was complicit in his own manipulation. People are complicated. They can be both victim and participant simultaneously. After the opening officially ended, our group walked to a nearby restaurant for dinner. We crowded around a long outdoor table. Elena and her friends, Robert, Maya and her family, my Global Reach colleagues, the gallery owner Carla who'd taken a chance on an unknown artist. The conversation flowed in multiple languages, everyone talking and laughing, wine being poured and shared. Elena stood up halfway through dinner, wine glass raised. I want to make a toast, she announced. To Thea, whose paintings we celebrated tonight. But more importantly, to all of us who have survived people who tried to make us smaller. Who convinced us we were the problem when really they were just threatened by who we might become. She looked at me, then at Robert, then at one of her architect friends who'd divorced last year. The best revenge is not destruction. Is not watching them suffer. The best revenge is building something so beautiful that you forget they exist. To beautiful lives built from broken pieces. Salute. Everyone chorused, glasses clinking. I looked around the table at these people who'd chosen to be here, who'd shown up for my small gallery opening in a neighborhood most tourists never saw, who'd made room in their lives for me when I'd arrived in Barcelona with nothing but 4 suitcases and a determination to figure out who I was. Maya leaned over and whispered, "You did it. You really did it." Did what? Built a whole life. A real one. Better than what you had before. I thought about that. My tiny apartment in Gracia that I could barely afford but loved fiercely. My permanent position at Global Reach leading a small team on Mediterranean projects. My paintings hanging in a gallery. My friendships with Elena and her circle. My terrible but improving Spanish. My Saturday morning routine at the market. My favorite cafe where the barista knew my order. Yeah, I said. I think I did. The next morning I woke early before Maya and her family, and walked to my usual cafe in Placa de la Vila. The same cafe where I'd been sitting when Silas's call had shattered my peace 6 months ago, when the wedding disaster had pulled me briefly back into Seattle's drama. I ordered café con leche and sat at my usual outdoor table with my sketchbook. My phone buzzed with messages. Maya asking if I wanted to meet for breakfast, Elena checking about lunch plans, Robert requesting coffee before his afternoon flight back to Vancouver, Christina forwarding a new project from a sustainable architecture firm in Lisbon. Each message represented a thread of the life I'd woven here. Work I'd chosen. Friends I'd made. Family who showed up. A community I'd built from nothing in a city that had welcomed me when I had nowhere else to go. I thought about Victoria, whose career had imploded and whose name had become a cautionary tale in Seattle's business community. About Silas, who was slowly rebuilding himself through therapy and reconnection with his brother. About Robert, who'd survived Victoria's manipulation and come through still capable of kindness and hope. And I realized something fundamental about revenge. Real revenge, the kind that actually mattered, wasn't about their suffering. It wasn't about Victoria losing her career or Silas experiencing public humiliation, or even about everyone finally seeing what Victoria had been capable of. Revenge was this. Sitting in a Barcelona plaza on a Sunday morning, coffee warm between my hands, sketchbook open to blank pages full of possibility, surrounded by a life I'd built entirely for myself. Revenge was remembering that 6 months ago I'd felt broken and worthless, and now feeling whole while knowing I'd never been the problem at all. Revenge was not needing to check Silas's social media or track Victoria's consequences or require updates on how their lives were unraveling. Revenge was the complete and total indifference that comes from being too busy living well to measure anyone else's suffering. I opened my sketchbook and started drawing the scene in front of me. The old men playing dominoes at the next table, the mother sharing a croissant with her toddler, the morning light hitting the church across the plaza, the flower seller setting up his stand, the city waking up around me. Not because anyone had commissioned it. Not because it would hang in a gallery or sell for money. Just because I wanted to. As I could. Because this was my life now and I was finally, completely, wholly present in it. My phone buzzed again. Robert, coffee at 2? Want to see your neighborhood before I leave. I typed back, yes. I'll show you my favorite spots. Then I put my phone away and returned to my sketch, losing myself in the details of ordinary morning in Barcelona. The life I'd built wasn't dramatic or impressive by Seattle standards. I wasn't a senior associate's wife anymore. I wasn't climbing any corporate ladder or attending charity galas or living in a renovated townhouse. But I was an artist with work in a gallery. A designer leading a team on meaningful projects. A friend who showed up for coffee and language exchanges and weekend walks. A sister whose family flew across an ocean to celebrate with her. A person who took up space without apologizing, who created without seeking permission, who existed fully and completely as herself. Victoria had tried to take my life and replace me in it. Instead, she'd accidentally freed me to build something better than I'd ever imagined possible. The barista brought me a second coffee without me asking, knowing my routine. I smiled my thanks in Spanish that was still imperfect but improving. Around me, Barcelona continued its Sunday morning rhythm. Church bells, conversations, children playing, life happening at its own unhurried pace. I was part of that rhythm now. Not a visitor, not someone passing through, but someone who belonged. Someone who'd walked through her own doorway and found home on the other side. That was the real revenge. Not destruction but creation. Not watching them fall but building something so beautiful I forgot to check if they were watching. I picked up my pencil and continued sketching, capturing the morning light and the quiet joy of a life that was finally, completely, entirely mine. If this story of quiet revenge and finding yourself again had you hooked, hit that like button right now. My favorite part was when Robert crashed the wedding and exposed Victoria's lies in front of everyone. What was your favorite moment? Drop it in the comments below. Want more incredible stories of justice, healing, and starting over? Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload.